Hi, I'm Ash and welcome to this review of the Spitfire 1180. If we take a quick look at the statistics, Axis named their foils by span rather than area, so it is 1.18 meters span, it has an aspect ratio of 9.13 and an overall area of 1554 centimeters squared. We are looking at this foil from a wing foiling perspective only. I've written it in varying conditions and will give my thoughts on who it suits, why you would want it and what conditions you might use it in. In case of any doubt, this is a big foil, and for a rider such as myself at 85 kilograms, it can be seen as primarily for very light wind use, but I've tested it in much stronger winds just to see. It has this elliptical shape to it, much like the wings of a World War II Spitfire, and this range was aimed at having good glide, pumping ability and to be very good at carving on a wave. Before I rode this foil, I sought advice from the Axis Foil Riders Facebook group on how this big 1180 rides. My reference foil for this comparison was an HPS 1050, which I already own, a fairly large foil that many riders are familiar with. The answer to my question was that the Spitfire 1180 is faster, better in low end, has more lift, more glide and better turning. So that's pretty much better at everything, so let's put that to the test. Let's start with lift. Here I'm on my 80 litre board with a 6.5 metre wing and it's around 10 to 12 knots of wind. The Spitfire lifts at quite a low speed, lower than the HPS 1050, so this data was correct. It's not a foil you want to kick up onto foil, it has a very large span and it really doesn't like it, unless you like flying off the back of your board at high speed into a backslapper. It definitely sits in the category of keeping your front foot pressure on and just speed it onto foil and lift up horizontally with board speed. When you do this, the foil is much better behaved. Once up on foil, it's really quite well behaved and fairly easy to control for a wide span foil. It does generate a lot of lift, so I was feeling every little bump despite it being a very light wind and pretty much flat calm conditions. Let's talk about speed next. It should come as no surprise that given that this is a 1550 area foil, it's not going to be what you would call fast. That said, it is faster than the HPS 1050, although I'm not sure that there is actually that much in it, it just feels a little bit faster. I don't think anyone buys a foil of this size and expects it to be a speed demon, so let's just say it's plenty fast enough given its size. It's not slow like a PNG 1150 for example. Given this is what we might consider to be towards a high aspect foil with its AR of 9.1, does that mean it has bad low end and will drop you unexpectedly off foil when things slow down? Well, here I'm happy to say that the low end is exceptional and you can go incredibly slow and still be on foil. This was quite fun for both tacks and jibes, which I'll come on to shortly. Overall, given its placement for me as a light wind foil, it has the low end to match and takes away some of that fear of not making a jibe because you can't gain enough speed to make it round on foil. I would also say that the low end is better than the HPS 1050, so another piece of advice that we were given that turned out to be correct. Okay, let's get into tacks and jibes, and here we can talk about turning. This is also where things get a little more complicated, as I ran the Spitfire 1180 with two different tail stabilisers. One was a skinny 362/50 and the other was a progressive 350. Somewhat unfortunately, I tried the skinny first, and I want to show you my first 4 jibes on the skinny Spitfire 1180 combo. It did only take those 4 jibes to work out what was going on, and this next one is what happened next. Now what's going on here is that the Spitfire 1180 is a really large span wing, and it's a high aspect wing as well, and the skinny is only a very small tail, and so what you've got is a big spanny wing overpowering a small skinny tail, unless you're very careful with your weight balance when you let go of the wing. And this was really what was going on, and you can see that in this clip here where I have another crash and the foil is kind of spinning around and trying to spin out, and the tail stabiliser hasn't really got everything under control. And this all changed when I switched to the Progressive 350. So I'm going to show you a montage of jibes on the Progressive 350 just to show how things changed, and changed quite dramatically from that stabiliser swap. So having figured out that the Progressive 350 was better for jibes, tacks and so on, how does the 1180 actually turn? Well, obviously on the skinny tail it's a bit sensitive to weight changes, and you can get used to that relatively quickly and get things back under control. It just surprised me at first, having been told this foil turns better than an HPS 1050, which I ride a lot, and so I wasn't expecting any drama or any weirdness from the foil. I guess here we have a spoiler alert in that it really doesn't turn better than an HPS 1050, or at least we can say it requires a higher level of rider competence to turn. Once you get the 1180 on the right table stabiliser and used to how it turns, you can really lean on it and poke tips out of the water, and it really turns very well. It's just not as beginner or intermediate friendly as the HPS 1050 in this regard, and it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of refinement of your technique to really get the best out of it in turns. Once you've got that technique, it turns very well. Let's move on to pumping the foil and wave riding. There is no footage that I managed to record from the much windier days I tested the 1180, mostly because it was either very dark under storm clouds or raining, as is typical of winter in the UK. I only had the 1180 for a couple of weeks, and they really weren't the best weeks for capturing footage, as you can probably tell. The footage I did get is from one of the only days where we got a tiny bit of sun breaking through the clouds. What I found was the Spitfire 1180 is very lifty and will find power even in the tiniest of bumps. But on windier days, when the swell was moving quickly, whilst it could surf the swell, I couldn't pump onto the swell in front of me, as it just wasn't fast enough to do that. It rides waves very well, but you have to be a little careful, as it is a large foil and produces quite a bit of front foot pressure, so it can be easy if you're not careful to overfoil as you go down the face of a wave. Regarding pumping, it was quite a stiff foil that produced a lot of pushback to the pump on your front foot. It was a foil you kind of tapped to pump it along rather than really pumping it up and down like a roller coaster. In small, medium speed bumps you could pump this a long way. I didn't really get those conditions. It was either almost flat or blowing strong with fast moving larger wind blown swell, so I feel like I probably missed out on the conditions to make the best of the 1180. Talking of foiling in stronger winds and chop, The Spitfire 1180 handled it okay, but it was picking up all the lift from every bit of chop and was quite a management process to navigate in choppy, turbulent water. I felt like I was on just too big of a foil in these conditions, something I'll come back to in the summary and conclusions. Let's talk about who this is for. I think this foil covers several types of riders, but one of those is not beginners. This is a high aspect, large span foil, and it requires some technique to use. It certainly would suit heavier riders due to its huge lift, and I feel is primarily aimed at intermediate or expert riders. This will also appeal to light wind specialists that aren't using downwind style boards and therefore need a big early to lift foil. This is a Spitfire, and so it is designed to ride waves, so this is a given that it will appeal to wave riders, especially if those waves are fairly small, not very powerful and relatively slow moving. In terms of what this foil is designed for, well, from a winging perspective it's for light wind foiling, where its very early lift, good glide and excellent low end can make getting on foil and staying on foil a little easier. It is also well suited to wing downwinding on small to medium sized wind driven swell. It's not suited to open ocean ground swell, as I don't think it's fast enough for that. Lastly, if you just want to surf small waves or swell, it is ideally suited to that. Let's talk about conclusions and my personal opinion on this foil. For me personally, it's just too big. I think the Spitfire 1100 is probably as big as I would want to go in this range. Whilst it is great in very light wind, I feel I could be on a smaller foil in the same conditions. I just don't need all that lift. If we compare it to the HPS 1050, which may be a foil you're coming from to this foil, the Spitfire 1180 is faster, has more glide, more lift and a lower stall speed than the HPS 1050. That said, a beginner could ride the HPS 1050, whereas I feel a beginner would struggle with the Spitfire 1180 as it has some large span, high aspect foil tendencies and is therefore more technical to ride. It doesn't turn as easily as the HPS 1050 and requires more refined technique to keep it under control. Overall, I think it is a very good light wind foil and an upgrade to the HPS 1050 in most areas. It's just more foil than I need to take advantage of very light winds. Lastly, I'd like to thank my wing buddy Chad, who lent me his Spitfire 1180 to do this review. I hope you liked the content. If you did, don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you on the next video.